Okay, so we are here today in Grosvenor Square. We're going to be covering Mayfair today. We're going to go on a little bit of a ghost tour / a Mayfair tour and close to Green Park. We're starting here in Grosvenor Square, also known as America Square or Little America to some people, because over there is where the American Embassy used to be. Up until recently, now it's been moved to 9 Elms. And this building here is being bought up by Qatari to be turned into another luxury hotel. We're standing also, of course, right next to Roosevelt here. So there's quite a few little American references. Statue of Roosevelt. We've got in the square traditionally, lots of American politicians and ambassadors have lived here before. So that's why it's got that heritage. And over there, the other end of the square, we've got the 9/11 Memorial, which is a memorial for the about 60 Britons who lost their lives during the 9/11 attack. And so it's also a good place to start because it references the Grosvenors. And the Grosvenor family are the ones that own this whole area of Mayfair, along with Belgravia. And Belgravia and Mayfair are the two areas in London that have the highest value on the property market. So you won't find more expensive properties than around here. So rounding up Grosvenor Square here, it does get a reference in a very famous novel by Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, because Dorian Gray is supposed to have a little house here in Grosvenor Square. And it's very likely that Oscar Wilde used a home of one of his rich friends here in Grosvenor Square as sort of the template for the character of Dorian Gray and as well for his home. So I've got a little quote here where he's saying, "In this fog, my dear Basil, why, I can't even recognize Grosvenor Square. I believe my house is somewhere about here, but I don't feel at all certain about it." There's a little reference to the square in some classic literature. Let's keep going. Just want to mention on the way here, before we get to Berkeley Square, that the Connaught Hotel here was one of the favourite drinking halls of the late Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. Not beer though, she liked to drink tea here. Tea and get biscuits. Maybe the odd coffee as well. This is where our late Queen, one of the favourite spots for our late Queen to go for her afternoon tea. So we're here in, oh God, I get it wrong now. Berkeley Square. Berkeley Square. I know it now. Berkeley Square. Not Berkeley. Berkeley. We're here in Berkeley Square. Stop. Many of the trees have been planted in the early history of Mayfair. And it's interesting how Mayfair started out. It used to be just one manor house here in this area. It used to be a lot more rural, just on the outskirts of London. And there was a fair here that started gaining notoriety, which began around 1686 and was finally shut down in 1764. Now this fair that happened every May was getting increasingly riotous and a public nuisance just because things went so wild around here. It was a chance for people to cut loose and, among a couple of examples, ride hogs and pigs as part of a hog race. They could go into brawls, control brawls and duels with each other. People were almost shooting each other on the street here in Mayfair. It was a wild affair. And so the nobility and the upper crust of society had a vested interest in shutting down this fair. They ended up shutting down Mayfair and making this a no-go zone. And that started the history of privilege around here, because then it became an exclusive area for the rich. Especially when Mayfair was shut down, it could become a place where peace and quiet could reign. And the Grosvenors, they married into the right family to gain the ownership of this place here. So it was a perfect opportunity for them not only to shut down the fair, but to make it a place of luxury and prestige. And for almost 300 years since, Mayfair has continued that tradition. It's a place where the richest tourists will come and stay in luxury hotels and do incredibly expensive shopping, along with many other very fancy art galleries, car shops, you name it. You find all that stuff here in Mayfair. Now, interesting enough, many of the trees here were planted in the late 18th century. So some of these trees are almost 300 years old. And the railings around here, well, the railings were picked out for Second World War. For the war effort, they were used for ammunition and other tools. Every bit of iron that could be scrapped around London was scrapped. So this square was one of the victims of that. Now I'm fully expecting some angry guy coming here opening the door. And we'll find out. Right then. Okay, we are now at our main dish. The most haunted house in all of London is supposed to be this house here. It's built in 1740, but the ghost stories only really begin after the death of one of its most famous residents, George Canning. So George Canning lived here till about the end of his life. And he was before Liz Truss, he was the shortest serving Prime Minister in English history. Now, he didn't have much to mention about the supposedly supernatural phenomena going on in here. But he does mention in his journals that there was strange, psychosomatic, I think that's the word he uses, strange psychosomatic events taking place in there. But that's the only mention he makes of it in his own journal. It's after him that a lot of the Victorian hysteria begins. Because as we all know, the Victorians, they loved a gothic tale, they loved a ghost tale. And especially a lot of the upper end of the Victorian class like to imagine all the horrors going on here. So it's very likely the ghost stories originate from that bloodthirst and desire of Victorians. The first few ghost stories begin after George Canning. There was a fellow called Robert Warboys. And by then, there was already rumors that ghosts were milling about in this place. Robert Warboys was a nobleman here in the area who made a bet to try and stay up in supposedly the most haunted room here on the first floor. And he would stay the night. But the landlord who owned it at the time supplied him with a little string and bell. So should he notice anything going wrong, he could ring the bell and try and get some attention. He also brought a shotgun with him just in case. Turned out the shotgun didn't help him out very much in the end. He did fire a shot and the bell was ringing frantically up there. When the landlord came up to find him, they found him dead in the room. And that is where all the ghost stories begin to take off from there. One of the more famous ones is by one called Thomas Myers. When Thomas Myers moved in, he actually prepared this to be his family home. Because he was about to marry the woman of his dreams. He had decked out the house in all the flowers he could find. He had almost rolled out the red carpet for her. And what happens on the day of their wedding? She stands him up. He gets jilted. And that drove him over the edge, they say. After that, he still continued living in the house on his own. But neighbors were complaining about the flicker of his candlelight going from one room to another. He would shuffle around restlessly in his own house. He would even lock himself in his room and only take food from his servant through a little slit in the door, apparently. So his mania became well known, and that may also be another cause for more ghost stories. Probably because neighbors could hear all the strange noises coming from him here in the various rooms. They claim that the ghost that lives, the worst of the entities here, called the Thing, some people claim to be Thomas Myers, because he still had a lot of anger after being betrayed on his wedding day. But we don't know for sure who the Thing is supposed to be. But that is supposed to be the most malignant entity here. Other ghosts that are said to be seen here on a weekly basis, I suppose. There's supposed to be a servant woman who throws herself out of the window. And suppose she threw herself out of the window to escape her master, her bullying and abusing master. But some people claim to see her ghost hopping out of the window and then falling through the ground and disappearing down through the ground. There's also supposed to be the ghost of a little girl wearing a little Scotch plaid dress. So those are some of the other entities said to be there. I'll give you a last story because there are many. But one of the later stories in the later 1800s is of two sailors who broke in there. And by that time, this place was becoming very derelict and neglected, which only helped center it as a ghost story house. But these two sailors, they apparently came here because they were looking for a place to sleep after a long night out. They were docked in a harbour here in London. And instead of paying for a hostel or to sleep in an inn, they decided to break into this derelict house. They broke in and they went up to the first floor, of course, and slept up there. And that is where they say that the Thing attacked these two sailors. Edward Blunden and Robert Martin stayed in the room, but then the Thing appeared, which was supposedly this writhing mass of darkness, which sounded and moved like a large middle-aged man, is what it's been described as. And it started attacking the two sailors, but one of them managed to escape. So Edward Blunden was being attacked and hoisted up in the air, while his sailor friend rushed out of the house trying to get help. And here the story differs a little bit, but some versions, you've got Robert charging out of the house right into the arms of a bobby, of a policeman, who can then help him and bring reinforcements. Other versions claim that he charged off to the nearest police station and got a whole squadron of policemen to come and help them. Regardless, by the time they arrived here, Edward Blunden was found dead at the end of the stairs leading down to the basement, mangled and mauled as if he had been beaten to death, almost like he had been killed by a bear, and lying down at the end of the stairs. Now, if you want to be a skeptic of ghosts, you could say he fell down the stairs and he was dead drunk and they whipped themselves up into a panic or hysteria. If you believe in ghosts, though, I wouldn't go up to the first floor. And even though the ones that stay around here would probably discredit all the ghost stories, there's still a police notice that hangs inside recommending that people don't go up there unless they've got urgent business there. Sorry. We're here at the Royal Institution, of which there's a funny little ghost story here as well, about Michael Faraday, the scientist who discovered electromagnetism. And apparently they say his ghost still haunts the main hall here of the Royal Institution, offering advice to other scientists when they need it. One example being an Eric Laithwaite, who was trying to replicate Michael Faraday's experiment of electromagnetism with a little dish and a ball, and trying to run an electrical current through the dish. Now, apparently the experiment failed the two first times he demonstrated it during a lecture for his students, but he claims that the ghosts of Faraday himself came to assure him that on the third time's the charm, it would work then. And lo and behold, when he tried it the third time, of course it worked. And that was apparently back in 1964. So that's a little extra ghost tale, more of a benign ghost, shall we say, that's going on. Not all ghosts around here are bad. On the notion of ghosts, you might be interested to know that the word ghost actually comes from the Old English word of ghast, a ghast. That's where the word originates from, which was more of a diffused term of sort of an evil, restless spirit, if you will. And London is supposedly crawling with ghasts, or ghosts, shall we call them. We're here at Burlington House and Burlington Arcade, named after a certain Lord Burlington, who was around in the early 1800s and bought this house here as well. And he added the arcade too, because he wanted a safe place for his wife to do her shopping. So he had plenty of jewelry shoppers installed here, and he hired soldiers from the 10th Regiment among the Hussars to serve as his police force. They were called the Beatles, not the Beatles like the band, but Beatles with a D instead. And they are still here to this day. You can find some members of the Beatles. They're kind of like tour guides / security these days, and they'll be wearing top hats and usually dark coats, so you'll be able to recognize them. And they're supported by other security staff here as well. And they are technically the first police force that was ever put here in London. They come even before the Bobbies, even before Robert Peel's Metropolitan Police Act. These guys were around, but they were only policing this area because they were, well, let's say private mercenaries almost of Lord Burlington. He also had another reason to install the arcade, because people apparently kept throwing rubbish over the walls of his house, and he couldn't have that, so he needed a bit of a buffer zone to keep people away from throwing stuff and crap over the walls of his house, interestingly enough. So there were more reasons for putting in the arcade. That's just a little funny story regarding that. And nowadays it's a main shopping thoroughfare as well around here. Quite fancy shopping that you'll find. There's also a little ghost story here. Percy the Poltergeist. Poltergeists are supposed to be more mischievous ghosts that move things around and play pranks on people almost. And Percy apparently has a thing for rearranging leather pieces into little semicircles and half circles, and likes to fling stuff across the wall, or at the wall, sorry, in various shops. And if you ask the Beatles here, they can tell you more about Percy the Poltergeist, because many of them have got personal encounters with the poltergeist. Even one of them claims that the poltergeist was active when he was talking to a group of tourists about the poltergeist. So there's plenty of ghost stories around here as well.